GDT project. And at regional level, we also have many relationship with different regional authority. And maybe the most effective is today is a working group working with Lviv administration, city and regions, because we unite both level, region and city. And we should start a separate project on developing regional policy. Maybe next month it will cover 6 regions. But today, let's say we position Lviv city like benchmark because of highest concentration of cluster, because the policy exists since many years. But maybe it's just one region in Ukraine at such level. So our, let's say, message to all stakeholder regional level in Ukraine is that we should be united, of course. We are ready, like as Ukrainian Cluster Alliance, we are ready to develop cluster program, help to regional authority. And of course, we are looking for really the most effective supporting instrument. And from this point of view, in this context, of course, any foreign experience, very, very important for us. We are looking for best practices for, for exchange, for partnership with other region country in Europe. That's why we invited you. And once again, I appreciate and thank you for your time and for your, and now the floor is yours, please.
Perfect. Bona tarda. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm more than pleased to share our cluster experience with all of you. Also, I would like to learn from your experience. I've been in the agency for 29 years almost. Next January, it's going to be 29 years. The majority of those related to cluster development. So almost all my career has been connected to clusters. So I can tell you about the ups and downs of our approach in Catalonia, and in this hour that we have together, I'm 100% open to answer all the questions you may have, the technical questions and also maybe sensitive questions, because indeed we try to touch upon many aspects when we work with clusters, some of which a little bit sensitive. So you can ask me anything that you want. I'm going to stop for the interpreter, right? I'll try to go slowly. No? Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So as I was saying, thank you very much. And I'll give you a summary of those 30 years through our model. When I have this type of interchanges with other countries, I always start saying that the important thing is to have a model which is unique for you. Not having a model, I don't think is a good option. Copying the model of another one is not either a good option. So everybody needs its own model. And I think that the concept of model is what gives you this long-term vision of cluster development, and not just having a program which is, I would say, fashionable for a certain time or for a certain political party. And when then there is a change, we are not interested in clusters anymore. In order to have this long-term vision, I think that it is key to have a model, as I said. So I'm going to tell you about the Catalan model, which is not, I don't know if it's the best or if it's better than our neighbors, but it's the best for us, which I guess it's the main idea. So at least is what we think. I'll share my presentation. You will have the PPT, indeed you can share it. I'll try to open it and I'll go through the presentation. Just a second. Okay, here we are. We'll start from the very beginning, because I think that the origins of this approach are still embedded in our current situation. So let me start from the very beginning. I think it's important to start describing what is a cluster for us. Maybe this is something very basic, but in Europe in general, when we use the word cluster, I think that many people is thinking on a cluster organization. And this is part of the story. A cluster is not a cluster organization. A cluster is an economic reality. This is a picture of my hometown.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jean. We see just your screen with file list, but not presentation. Maybe just switch to presentation.
So let me.
Maybe again. Let's try again.
I'll do it again. Let me close the other things. Okay. Let me check.
Now it's fine. Just make it full screen.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not your full screen if you can make full screen.
It should be full screen. At least I see it full screen.
Okay.
No, not you?
But we see it well, so you can continue like that. Yeah, okay.
Let me check again, because I'm seeing full screen. No?
No, but we can continue like that. I think it's good size.
Різниця, хай буде.
Good size, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll keep going. As I was telling you that starting from the beginning,
Okay.
what we understand for clusters is an economic reality. This is a picture of my hometown. My hometown is famous for sausages. Actually, is the center of one of the most outstanding sectorial value change in pork meat. Here, what you see is a constellation of connected companies in this business.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we see just first slide with name cluster policy in Catalonia.
So I don't know what's going on, because I see that I'm passing the slides. I don't know what's.
If you share, just maybe share the overall entire screen. Yeah, right? You share your entire screen.
That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing.
Maybe you. Yeah, now we see is. Yeah, now. Yeah. Oh,
now it's okay.
Great. Now it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I was telling you, this is my hometown, famous place for sausage. Actually, the center of a complete and complex value chain around the business of pork meat. In here, you see different businesses which are connected, from sausage manufacturers to traditional retailers, feed manufacturers, farms for fattening, slaughterhouses, genetics, universities, tech centers. In here, what you see is a concentration of firms around a specialization. You see a value chain. You also see proximity. This happens in a very tiny place. And with these companies, there is competition, and also there is cooperation. So this concept of co-opetition. One important aspect in clusters is not only cooperation, which I guess is the most used word in the international context, but also rivalry. It's very important that there is rivalry between firms. There is critical mass. In Catalonia, this business accounts for 600 firms with a global turnover of 6,000 million euros. In our context, this is a high critical mass. To develop the competitiveness of this value chain, there is a cluster organization. Here you have the name. But I think it's important to differentiate between the cluster as an economic reality with the cluster organization. The cluster organization and my organization, ACCIÓ, which is the public agency for competitiveness, we are tools to increase the competitiveness of this business reality. But we are tools. We are not the objective. To set up a cluster organization is not an objective. It's a tool to have this impact on companies. So I would like to start with this. What is a cluster? Is an economic reality, is an economic phenomena that you can find all over the world. Then you may have organizations at the public side and the private side to increase the competitiveness of companies through clusters. This is a long story in our case. You know that the cluster concept was coined by Harvard professor Michael Porter in 1990. 1992, we started this long journey, more than 30 years. A couple of years ago, we celebrated the 30th anniversary. Through these 30 years, as I said, I've been in office for 29 already. 15 ministers have been in office during these 30 years from 3 different political parties. No interruptions in the policy. So 15 ministers, 3 different political parties, no interruptions in the policy. This is something exceptional. I would say it's exceptional all over Europe. That's why I start with this, because it's not easy. Indeed, we've had highs and lows, but we still have this policy, which is, you know, I would say, learning from the origins, but also we are having this evolution over time because the world is very different from what it was at the beginning of the 90s. You know, the origins of the cluster concept, explained in this book. Basically, Professor Porter was called by the president of the US, asking him, please analyze why is Japan overtaking the US in competitiveness? And Porter said, okay, I'm going to study the competitiveness model of Japan, but I want to study more countries. And basically, he carried out a research of 10 sectors in 10 countries. Countries like Singapore, like South Korea, like Switzerland, like Denmark. And one interesting conclusion out of this research was that competitiveness wasn't related anymore to being big and having, you know, great resources. So it wasn't about population and resources anymore, because these tiny countries like Denmark, Switzerland, and Singapore were some of the most competitive countries worldwide with no natural resources and very few people. What was the key? To be specialized in what makes you different, in your differential capabilities. And usually this specialization was concentrated in tiny places, in proximity. That was why he developed the theory of clusters, as I said, 1990. The gentleman was our minister at that time, and he was the one starting the cluster policy. He read that book, he met Porter and said, I want to design and implement a new industrial policy in Catalonia using clusters as a framework. When you start the cluster policy, basically you have, I think that you have 2 options. One is that you have a list of 5, 6 magical sectors. And I use the word magical to say that you think that everything is going to be fantastic if you're strong in biotech or in aerospace or in artificial intelligence, in sectors that become trending for different things. There is a hype in some sectors. This is one option, a short list of sectors. The other option is to use clusters as a tool to increase the competitiveness of your global economy. We chose the latter. We chose this second approach, and we've had a global impact on more than 40 sectors all over the years. So we don't believe in good sectors, bad sectors. We believe in good strategies, bad strategies in all sectors. So we don't pick 5 sectors saying you are fantastic. We use it in a very cross-sectorial way because our economy is very diversified. This is one of the reasons why we have 27 clusters in our portfolio. Catalonia is a quite small place. 27 clusters is a high number. And this is the result of a couple of things. As I said, one, our economy is very diversified, so we have the eggs in different baskets. There is no single sector, industrial sector, generating more than 17% of our industrial GDP. Second thing, we like to have a very focused approach on clusters. We don't look for critical mass as the main goal, we look more as clusters being a tool to sophisticate companies' strategies. So it is very important to have a focus on that. Some examples, we don't have one food cluster, we have 5. Because the strategies, if you want to sell your product to Harrods in London, are different than the ones if you want to sell your product to a white brand, a big supermarket with a low-cost strategy. So even though you are from the same food sector, we prefer to have a cluster on companies following a premium strategy with other following a white brand strategy. That's the second reason why we have so many clusters, because we love the concept of focus. Here you have some general figures. In our 27 clusters, we have 3,000 firms participating with a global turnover of 90,000 million euros. To give you an idea, this is more than 20% of the Catalonia GDP. To give you another idea, the Catalonia GDP equals Finland's. In our clusters, those firms generate 36% of the industrial GDP and 36% of the industrial jobs. So you see that there is a macroeconomic impact, even though clusters are a microeconomic tool, altogether they generate a macroeconomic impact in our economy. Some examples of the clusters we have. It is very important to know your history. I think for all of us, we need to understand our economic history. One example in this picture, at the left side, you have a map from the Middle Age. It's our leather cluster, documented from the 13th century, concentrated around a river in a 40,000 inhabitants town, 1 hour from Barcelona. This is history. But at the right side of the picture, you have the future. We have these historical capabilities that they are still competitive because they have learned how to change the strategy over time. For instance, learning how to work with Louis Vuitton. So our leather cluster used to be focused on manufacturing a commodity for the Spanish shoe industry. Now they are positioned to work with international luxury segment of fashion. You have history, but history looking at the future. We also have some clusters that didn't exist 30 years ago, but today they are really important for us. And in this context of climate change, we are happy to have capabilities in water technologies. This is another example of a cluster that it's built around technological and business capabilities around the wall of water. The last 2 years, with the severe drought that we had in Catalonia, this cluster really was very busy trying to provide solutions to other industries in order to reduce the consumption of water. So your portfolio is the result of history and also of looking at the future. As I earlier said, not all cluster models look for the same things. We all look for competitiveness, but there are some cluster models looking for internationalization. I would say this is the case of Denmark. You have other cluster models looking on using clusters as a channel for innovation funds. I would say this is the case of France. The case of Catalonia is to try to use the cluster methodology to sophisticate companies' strategy. So our main goal is to have an impact on business strategy. In here, you have several examples of so. The same Michael Porter in his book on competition from 1998, chapter 7, speaking about the Catalan model, or at the right side of the slide, you see a case on this leather cluster that I told you from 1996 from Harvard Business School. Cases, books speaking about this influence of the cluster methodology on business strategy. We do so through 6 axes. I'm going to give you some examples, okay? Basically, we try to understand how business competitiveness works, and use clusters as a significant tool to help companies in those 6 areas. At the core, this concept of a strategic change. A cluster should be like a GPS to help a firm understanding how the sector is changing and in which direction to focus the company. So basically, this is our hypothesis. There is a time in the history of firms, of all firms, that you rather change or you rather shut down your company. This inflection point is key for all sectors, for furniture, for food, for energy, for all different segments. And as I said, we would like to use the cluster methodology as this GPS to help these firms understanding when to change and through which direction to change. It is like there is this connection, this virtuous cycle between the challenges at the sectorial level, at the cluster level. We work in fashion, which are the challenges in fashion, but then having individual firms understanding those challenges and changing their business model. So there is a macro level and a micro level. This also implies sometimes a change in the perimeter of the cluster itself. We used to have a cluster on agricultural machinery, but over the years, we understand that just manufacturing tractor components is a tiny part of this value chain. So we need to have companies, fertilizers, we need drones, we need different type of companies in the value chain. Also in here, you see there are thousands of startups breaking the conventional wisdom of the farm. So our cluster is not anymore agricultural machinery, is agricultural means, which basically means from the fertilizer to the drone, also indeed components for tractors. Another example of this shift that we promote in cluster organizations is the going back to the same slide. You remember the pork meat cluster. If we look at the future, in here you see some expected outcomes from market research on protein. If you look at today, here you see 2025, almost 100% of the protein comes from animals. But you have a look at 2040, 60% of protein will come from plants or from cultivated meat, which basically is meat that is produced in a lab. If you want to develop the strategy of your pork meat cluster, you need to tell them that it's not about pork meat anymore. It's about protein. Because there are 3 sides in this market. If you stay in animal protein, you're going to lose 2/3 of the market. So this is a very interesting shift in this cluster from pork meat to protein. In order to have these companies changing the strategy, apart from the cluster methodology, we have some grants. Here an example of a grant that we provide and through which the last 3 years we have granted 200 firms to change the strategy. And the interesting point in here is that we want to have a territorial balance. The GDP in Catalonia is very concentrated in Barcelona and around Barcelona, and we want to use clusters as a tool also for the rural areas to upgrade. So I think this is an interesting issue, probably also for you, that the value is not generated in only in big cities and around, that there is this spread impact through the territory. And also in this strategy segment, we have a program for cluster firms executives in Boston. So every year we're sending around 20 CEOs from cluster firms for a week to Boston to go through a program, which is a strategy program in Harvard, MIT. Also, we connect with venture capital and so on and some others And this is something that we organize from the agency, and we also co-finance part of this trip. We just did it a couple of weeks ago, and it's also fantastic because these CEOs belong to different clusters. They don't know each other, and after 1 week together, you get a lot of interaction between them. So I would say that the summary is that we try to use the cluster methodology as a school of strategy. In here you see 40 CEOs designing together the future strategies of their specific cluster. In terms of the cluster organization, we don't speak as being the representative of a sector. We want them to be a representative of a change in a sector. So for representing a sector, you have the regular business associations. You don't need a cluster organization. For representing a change in a sector, this is another different DNA. In terms of internationalization, the example I would like to share is that we carry out an internationalization plan for all clusters. We don't want companies to go searching for opportunities as they come, but to have a reflection, what are we strong at, and then to build a 2-3 year plan. We do this for all the clusters to have this more strategic approach. Indeed, talent is another issue that our firms are very concerned about. Usually companies tell us there is people available, but the profiles that I need, there is no match. So basically we work together with the labor department, with the 27 clusters, interviewing the firms and asking them what type of talent do you need? And we created 38 new training specialties to match this in all sectors. In terms of innovation, in here you see an example of the most important Spanish program for joint R&D related to our GDP. The return for Catalonia should be around 20%, but we get 30%. I think this is a very good figure of why clusters are the perfect environment for joint R&D. And I guess this is because of 3 reasons. First of all, there are trust relationships. Second, there are shared technological challenges. And third, you have the offer and demand of technology in the cluster. The offer, research centers, universities, the demand, companies. If you have them all together in the cluster, then you get these big R&D consortia, which is, I would say, in a more natural way than if you're not in a cluster itself. I'm just getting to the end. We don't want to help companies grow just in EBITDA. We would like them to grow also having a social and an environmental positive impact. And we call this, also following Porter, share value. So basically what we understand is that the social issues that we have globally, environmental issues that we have globally, and I think that last week we've shown this in COP29, that has been also, I would say, a very good exercise with a very bad result, that you need the private sector to be engaged in the main problems of society worldwide. We developed a methodology trying to help companies creating shared value in a systematic way, which means being profitable, but also doing the good for society and the environment, as I said, this holistic concept, through clusters, using, in our opinion, the most advanced methodology worldwide, which is the one coming from the B Corp movement. I really recommend that you have a look at this movement. This movement was born in the US kind of 15 years ago, now is spread all over the world, and it helps companies having a diagnosis in terms of how they are doing in this holistic concept of sustainability, not just the one related to the environment, but also related to social issues like workers, providers, territory, so on and so forth. We have a capacity building program for firms through clusters. basically trying to find new business opportunities at the intersection of this concept of share value and their current business. And at the end of the funnel, some of those firms are the ones who run this marathon of transforming the strategy, being a company which is excellent in this triple impact approach. This is the example of what I told you, the B Corp movement. We like it because when you say the word sustainability, usually we only think in the environment, but this is more holistic. It affects, as I said, workers, providers. There is a governance issue, so on and so forth. So we have Catalan SMEs basically using this model to be more competitive, generating this share value. And there is an award that our president hands out every year to the best Catalan company of the year. This award is handed out to the company which has been excellent in share value. So it's also our methodology to say this is the best Catalan company of the year. And last but not least, we started a new program in order to get more dimension. Our firms are 95% micro companies, not even SMEs, micro companies, fewer than 2 million euros turnover. And we need to reverse this. We've identified that there is a cultural thing. So we started capacity building for CEOs, trying to help them understand that it's good to grow. Also, we are connecting them with finance experts in order to analyze the business model, if it's fine-tuned from growing or it needs to be adjusted. We are providing 120,000 euros per company to develop a growth plan, and also we connect them with basically investors. So those companies that want to grow, we have talent, we have money, we have connection to investors. Every year we have our flagship, which is called the Cluster Day. And here you have the 3 editions that we've organized in the past. This year is going to be about growth. Basically, we join 400 companies, and this is also good for having this cluster community all together. We believe that cluster policy reaches its full potential, which is when it's not another silo. But cluster is the perfect intersection between competitiveness policies. As I said, training policy, science policy, industrial policy, all working together. In here you see 2 examples of the last 2 cluster initiatives that we activated. One was on tourism, tech tourism cluster, and we did it all together with the Department of Tourism. The second one was on waste management, and we did it all together with the Agency for Waste. This is a great example. If you tell firms to cooperate from the government, you need to give an example, to show an example also cooperating between the different departments. Over these 30 years, we have generated a team of 200 cluster professionals, and I would like to also to show this. We started being a couple of people. Now we are 200. The majority of those in the private sector, some of those in our team in the public sector. We did this exercise in order to say, we like to share a lot of stories, but what do the numbers say? So let's have a look at numbers. What's the impact of everything? So we carried out a control group comparing cluster firms with no cluster firms. And in here, I'll show you the results. Cluster firms, in this certain period, there was a growth in turnover of 25%. Non-cluster firms, 9.9. The same, the competitors, I mean, cluster by cluster. Job creation, 18% if you're a cluster firm, 11 if you're not. EBITDA growth, 26 versus 21. Exports, 56% of cluster firm export, 47 of non-cluster firms. Branches abroad, 12 versus 6. An important, a register of innovative SMEs, that is in the national ministry, 12% cluster firms, 3% non-cluster firms. And one European project that is very related to technological capabilities, 11% cluster firms, 2% non-cluster firms. 7 out of 7 metrics, cluster firms perform better than the competitors being non-cluster firms. This doesn't show causality. We cannot say that this is thanks of being a cluster firms, but at least they show something very important. Usually, sectorial policies have been focused to help companies in sectors that were in crisis. This is exactly the contrary. We are working with the best firms in each sector. And the ones that want to catch up, they are invited to join us. But at least it's a good example of that. The most competitive companies in a certain sector, they are participating in the cluster approach. As I said, we are 200 people. We have a year budget in the cluster department of 7 million euros for joint and individual projects. Following what I said at the beginning, that it's important, in our opinion, to have a model, it is also important to have a cluster ecosystem. It's not only to have a pro-cluster government, the public side. It is important to have the private side with all those companies participating, to have consultants, to have business schools. Also, in our case, we have a couple of international cluster organizations based in Catalonia. One is the TCI network. The other one is the European Foundation for Cluster Excellence. So this is a cluster ecosystem. It's not just the public side or just the private side. It's a holistic approach. And we are more than happy and honored that this 30-year history has led us to having this year a case on our cluster policy published by Harvard Business School. We went to Boston last March to present the case. And as I said, we are more than honored to have that, basically because it's a sparkle to keep thinking that we want to keep improving. We're not saying we are perfect, we are not. It's a sparkle to keep saying that we are improving. And we're more than happy to have you as colleagues, as it was said in the Accelerate GDT program, and open to increase the cooperation with all of you. So thank you very much. Here you have my contact data, and I guess we have some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bravo, Joan. You and your colleagues, it's really impressive, your policy, your achievement. Yeah, I think you are one of the, I don't know, the most successful region in terms of cluster policy in Europe, right? I don't know.
We used to be the best in football. Now we're not the best in football anymore, but we're catching up. But there is no ranking, you know. But at least we are one of the first that we started, and we're still learning how to keep improving. I think that's the good, behavior to start every day.
Yeah, let's start the question. So my first question is, do you have in your cluster policy some rules for accreditation of cluster? Because you mentioned about 27. So if, for example, tomorrow some new or young cluster wants to be added, so how do you proceed?
Yes, we created. I think it's interesting that the first 20 years of our cluster policy, there was nothing in the official journal. Nothing for 20 years, because it was a way to organize the cluster policy. So we didn't need to publish anything in the official journal. Okay, that's I think that's important. What happened 2012 is that the cluster phenomena was, becoming a bit a hype, and then different cluster organizations were approaching us, and we needed a specific plan. And that's when we created our program. But it's interesting that the first 20 years, the former minister said that he wanted a smart way to organize the dialogue between the private and the public sector. And clusters were this smart way to do so. Okay? So for 20 years, nothing in the official journal. Over the last years, we created this accreditation that consists of several services that are already presented today, some of those, to the cluster organizations that fulfill 17 criteria, 17, related to critical mass, cluster team, board of directors, action plan, so on and so forth. If you're interested, I can send you the 17 criteria by email, but we do have an accreditation formally established with these 17 criteria related to the services that we offer and the option to get the co-finance. I think that is another interesting issue. If you are part of our program, it is not written anywhere that you will receive money. It is written that you'd get the chance to receive money, but you have to compete with the other clusters.
Does it mean that not everybody from 27 get money?
They do, but let's say, for instance, this 2024, we have money split into two types of programs. One is the year action plan of the cluster. The other one goes to cooperative projects. Related to the first one, 2 clusters out of 27 didn't receive money.
Okay.
The second part in projects, 2 other clusters didn't get money because they need to get to a certain level. Otherwise, there is no money for them.
Yeah, good. Enough fair game. So my last question, and then I switch to our audience. So my last question about the goals of because you mentioned generally about the project, but which project or which direction do you prefer to finance with clusters? Yeah, I think it's really very important to understand. Maybe the same 5 elements you show it or different one.
That's a good question, a very important question. Our methodology, let's say in general, cluster methodology consists of 2 elements: analysis and process. You need to understand the strategic challenges of a specific segment, let's say furniture, let's say premium food, advanced materials, whatever. You need to understand the challenges, and then you need to build an action plan to transform those challenges into a reality. That's a very basic summary of the cluster methodology. So when it comes to invest our money through grants, I would say that the first key question is this related to a challenge? Is this project related to a key challenge? If the answer is no, there is not much options that we are co-financing this project. Second interesting thing, furniture and mobility have different challenges. So we need to go to the specifics. Then there are some general rules. Everybody's in the twin transition, digital transition, green transition. We know that, but you need to go into the details. So it is very important that we put the money in the right future strategies for that cluster. And to do so, we not only provide money, but every cluster has a peer in our team. There is somebody in our team who is the cluster peer. They work together. So then there shouldn't be a surprise that the cluster is applying for money to do 1, 2, 3, because every week is talking to the peer in the agency. So they do it together, right? You still have some surprises, but it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, it's our dream. Colleagues from Ukrainian Agency of Regional Development who hear us, Yeah, maybe, I don't know, next year we'll do the same, pair and to work like peer on the same project, but it's really our dream in Ukrainian Cluster Alliance, because we also built this year and previous year, we built a lot of project of Ukrainian recovery, but we really very keen to go to, cooperation with regional agency. Okay, so let's switch to question of I see, for example, there is question how looks like a strategy of your cluster, where we can get a knowledge of this document if they exist, a strategy of clusters. I don't know, maybe you have some example, or we can find them on the website. I think we can find.
I think that what is important, and I can share some materials with you, is that over the years, the methodology to define and implement the cluster strategy is the same, regardless the sector.
Wow.
Is the same.
Like blueprint. Yeah, template.
Exactly. But then indeed, you need an expertise to identify what's the value chain, which are the challenges, which companies are the ones looking at the future and not looking at the past. There is an expertise on that, right? But what I think is interesting is that give us sausages or planes, we apply the same methodology. And I think that this is a key issue. And in our case, this methodology, the experts of this methodology are some consultants, but basically is our team in the agency. Then if you have 27 clusters, you don't need 27 experts on those sectors. You need the amount of people that you have, experts in the process. Then you don't care. You give me fashion, I apply the process. You give me furniture, I apply the same process. The sector changes, but the process stays the same.
Yeah. Good. It's really great. It's very looks familiar for us, but in terms that we just want to follow the same approach, but we are really just at the beginning stage. There is another question: what mechanism of implementation of your regional policy you use? Like you mentioned about voucher or grant, but what about taxes or some, I don't know, incentive for investment into cluster? Do you use such some other mechanism?
Not actually. We don't have. Actually, the taxes in Spain, the majority of those are regulated by the central government, not by the regional government. A tiny fraction of taxes, are managed from the regional government, but from the Department of Economy, not our case, which we are a business. So it's not one mechanism that we have. Basically, we have grants and the methodology, but one important aspect is that we never tell a company to be part of a cluster initiative because there are grants. We try to show them that they should be part of a cluster initiative because they are going to become more competitive. Then through the process, there would be grants depending on projects, but it's good that they understand the concept, that they try it, that they try to implement the basic things and not just come because there are grants. So I think it's important to have budget, but the objective is not that there is public budget. The objective is to upgrade your competitiveness.
Yeah, I think it's a great message for Ukrainian cluster, just because many cluster or young cluster in Ukraine appear just because there are some, initiative people which aim to create cluster just because they are looking for money, grant money. Yeah, it's like hype in Ukraine. Let's create cluster just because we'll get a grant. It's not a good approach, I think. And your example is very demonstrative. Yeah. Okay, colleagues. Any other question, please? You can піднімайте руку, якщо ви хочете, можете українською, там чи пишіть далі в чаті, які ще є питання. Maybe there was one question during registration process. So your agency is responsible, right, for whole cluster policy in Catalonia, right? Okay, so and you report to Catalonian government, right? Okay.
Yes,
So
if you want, I can describe it a little bit more. So Catalonia has a regional government, actually with some competencies that other regions in Spain don't have. So we have, let's say, a more advanced competence framework. Then the Catalan government has different ministries, to call it this way, and from the ministries, sometimes they hang agencies. When you have an agency, is because you want to be more flexible, more independent, and to go faster than the regular public sector, right? That's why an agency exists. In our case, we hang from the Ministry of Business and Labor. We are the agency for competitiveness. We are 500 people, 400 in Catalonia, 100 in 40 offices all over the world. And we have this flexibility, even though we belong to the Catalonia government. So that's a bit how we are structured.
Mhm. Yeah, okay. I see that our time is over, but maybe one more question. The question is about if you develop in Catalonia cluster like industrial park, or if there is some connection to cluster with industrial park, because I just explained the context, because in Ukraine, our government, they took the new law about industrial park, and there is a lot of how the hype or hopes for this industrial park, like tools of industrial development, because there is some reducing tax for manufacture and so on. And today we have a lot of discussion how we can merge, clusters with industrial parks, something like that. So what is your policy in Catalonia about that?
There is no connection between clusters and industrial parks. That would be the first sentence. Second thing, I think is wise if you are designing an infrastructure that you talk to your main sectors. For instance, if you want to develop a biotech cluster, there is a very specialized infrastructure needed for biotech companies. Then if you have, then if you have
I switch some guys who
yeah, it's Yuri.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
Yeah. So I was saying, if you want to develop a biotech cluster, you need a specialized infrastructure for biotech firms. Then it's wise that when you design the industrial park, there is communication between infrastructure and sectors, right? So I think it's wise to do so. In our case, our approach is not that much related to infrastructure, but I think that it's important to talk between the different instruments, as I said at the beginning.
Great. And the last question comes from Kiev Regional Administration. They ask, how do you gather the data about, for example, impact of cluster into GDP, regional GDP, just by company, or what is methodology?
So there has been a lot of talk about cluster impact over the last 20 years, okay? I really recommend that you have a look at the TCI network. I don't know if some of you have been participating at TCI. TCI network is a network of cluster practitioners from all over the world. This network was set up in Catalonia, actually, 25 years ago. And every year there are a couple of congresses organized in different places, and there are also some working groups. There was a working group on evaluation. So there has been a lot of talk about cluster evaluation. The short answer is that it is very difficult to assess the impact of cluster development on your GDP. It's very difficult because, as I said, when I describe our control group, causality, it's very difficult to be demonstrated, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So at least what we have, and I showed some examples, is that this control group gives you an impact of business performance. You compare cluster firms with their competitors being not cluster firms, you can have some conclusions out of that. Then, for instance, the main figures of our cluster program, you have an static picture of your economy. In our case, 3,000 firms, 90,000 million euros, which is more than 20% of our GDP, 36% of the industrial GDP, and the industrial jobs is a static picture. Then we also analyze the money that we invest. For every public euro that we invest through a grant in firms, we generate 4 private euros. Okay, so it's 1/4. And then I would say that you have a lot of qualitative aspects which are difficult to quantify in metrics. For instance, this new type of dialogue between the private and public sector, not based on a lobby relationships, but on working together to build a competitiveness agenda, it's very difficult to quantify, but it's a new type of dialogue which has a tremendous impact. So I think you have some metrics that are there, and if you want, I can share also our metric system. We have an evaluation system that we carry out every year, and then some qualitative aspects that also should be described.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jean, because our time is over. So really very interesting, very impressive. We had already some exchange with, I don't know, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, but really your example is really very, very impressive for us. So thanks a lot. Let's keep in touch, and
absolutely,
maybe, our audience will have some more questions, but we can continue on this sense.
Perfect. I will be more than pleased to have another session with you. Congratulations for your cluster efforts. And I give you all my strength to you and to Crane. So good luck for the future, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. We know that you support us and really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bye.
Колеги, дуже всім дякуємо. Презентації будуть, запис буде. Так що дякуємо, що особливо нашим регіональним агенціям, обласним адміністраціям, хто підключився, міським адміністраціям, тому що кластери – це дійсно наша спільна справа. І як Український кластерний альянс, наші кластери, ми готові до співпраці, тому давайте спільно будувати кластерні політики, нам є в кого вчитися. Так що всім гарного вечора, бережіть себе і слава Україні! Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.